The Freedom of Information Act request to NIST was denied with the claim that releasing this data might jeopardize public safety. How could it possibly jeopardize public safety?
The destruction of evidence was a criminal act in itself. It was already being carted away and destroyed when the FEMA investigators got there about a month after September 11th.
You can't do science when you are deprived of the evidence and when your hypothesis is the least valid instead of the most likely. When the most likely hypothesis in the case of Building 7 wasn't even mentioned. This is not science.
The scientific forensic evidence, ignored by NIST, but carefully reviewed by teams of technical professionals, corroborates the hypothesis of explosive controlled demolition. We've traveled to 21 foreign countries and 32 American cities, bringing this evidence to the attention of the public. And we're backed by 9/11 family members and other concerned citizens who are calling for an independent, unbiased investigation.
I'm a family member trying to find out the answers to the murder of 3,000 plus people. The bottom line is that it needs to be investigated properly.
Please look at architects and engineers. People all around the world, scientists all around the world are questioning this. And there's some deep, deep explaining to do.
It took some kind of consciousness raising on my part before I was willing to look at the possibilities. And really, you need to go where the evidence leads.
As an engineer, and I have 3 degrees in engineering, I signed that petition for architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth some time ago because the American people absolutely need the truth of 9/11.
Look at the evidence. In fact, I'll say this very categorically. Any reasonable person who looks at the evidence that's been brought forward has got to come away with the feeling that something has to be done, a real investigation has to be put forward.
We will never heal. This country will never, ever, ever forget that day. We have to demand a new investigation. I want justice here.
The country owns this. We were all victims. You all should want answers. It's not just ours, not just mine. We all lost something that day.
It's distressing for everyone to come to terms with this evidence, but we must pursue the truth wherever it leads. Look at the evidence and decide for yourself.
The reason the collapsing buildings looked like a controlled demolition, say experts, is because they were a controlled demolition. Photos and video recordings confirm that explosions occurred at the base of the 2 towers as well as in Building 7 before they fell. On September 24th, firefighter Louis Caccioli told People Weekly point blank, "We think there were bombs set in the building." That claim was echoed by many witnesses and by firefighters who heard the explosions just before Tower 1, Tower 2, and Building 7 collapsed. The steel-supported twin towers were built to withstand the impact of a passenger jetliner, yet the official explanation for their collapse is that the burning jet fuel heated the steel support beams and caused them to buckle. Expert independent investigators insist that it's impossible for jet fuel burning in oxygen to melt steel and that most of the jet fuel burned up outside the buildings in clearly visible fireballs. After the crashes, the white smoke turned black, indicating cooling temperatures, not rising temperatures as reported. Why did a company called Controlled Demolition quickly haul away, melt down, and dispose of 499,850 pieces of structural steel that could have proved the temperature the steel had reached and the use of explosives? If these 3 World Trade Center buildings were rigged with explosives, when could the explosives have been installed, and who controlled access to the buildings? The 30-year-old World Trade Center has always been publicly owned and managed by the New York, New Jersey Port Authority. That is, until a Jewish businessman named Louis Eisenberg became the chairman. Eisenberg is an active leader in Jewish Zionist organizations. He personally oversaw negotiations that put the publicly owned World Trade Center into private hands. Those private hands belonged to 2 Jewish pro-Zionist billionaires named Larry Silverstein and Frank Lowy, even though their bid was lower than other bids. Lowy served as a commando in the Israeli army, and Silverstein just happens to be the former chairman of the United Jewish Israel Appeal. With Eisenberg's help, they landed the 99-year lease worth $8 billion for half price at $3.5 billion. During the moving, renovations, and security changeovers, explosives could have easily been installed in the buildings without detection. George W.'s brother, Marvin Bush, was not only the director of the World Trade Center's electronic security company, he was also the director of the World Trade Center's casualty insurance company called Houston Casualty. That company terminated their insurance coverage for the World Trade Center before 9/11, right in the nick of time. Another suspicious company occupied the 16th and 17th floors of the North Tower. That company, called Zim Israeli American Shipping, suddenly broke their lease, paid a $50,000 penalty, and moved out of the World Trade Center only weeks before 9/11. Zim Israeli American Shipping is owned by Zim Israel Navigation, which just happens to be owned by the government of Israel. If the new owners, Silverstein and Lowy, knew about the 9/11 attacks in advance, why did they buy a 99-year lease to the doomed buildings? Because they could do the simple math. Silverstein bought the $3.5 billion World Trade Center with only a $15 million down payment, which amounts to 0.01% of the total. He took out maximum terrorist insurance coverage only 6 weeks before the attacks. The demolition of the World Trade Center buildings on 9/11 eliminated Silverstein's cost for an $800 million facelift to update the aging 30-year-old buildings. As soon as the spanking new World Trade Center is finally built and expanded to over 11 million square feet of rental space, Silverstein stands to pocket billions of dollars per month. In the meantime, U.S. taxpayers are covering Silverstein's so-called losses. Then there's the big payouts from insurance policies with mega-terrorism insurance, which Silverstein took out just weeks before 9/11. Silverstein is demanding a 200% payout by claiming payouts for 2 separate 9/11 attacks instead of 1. Silverstein's insurance companies, called Swiss Re and Munich Re, are the same companies under investigation for advanced knowledge of 9/11 and for profiting from 9/11 on the stock market. If Silverstein's insurance companies knew in advance about the attacks, why would they insure doomed buildings? Were these giant insurance companies handpicked to keep a lid on their insurance investigation findings and to ignore the evidence of 9/11 cover-ups? Silverstein has since bought out Frank Lowy, paid off investors and loan groups, put limits on victim compensation claims, and turned the publicly owned World Trade Center into the smelliest private real estate deal in American history. George W. Bush threw up permanent roadblocks to stop an independent investigation of the 9/11 events. When the 9/11 Senate Committee report was published, 27 pages that would have connected international banks to 9/11 were censored. On October 30th, 2003, A CBC television documentary investigated the 10-year friendship between the Bush family, the bin Laden family of Saudi Arabia, and the Saudi royal family. That friendship includes illegal presidential campaign contributions and partnerships in oil and weapons companies like the Carlyle Group. Since 9/11, 2,500 relatives of victims filed trillion-dollar lawsuits against 7 international banks, against the Saudi friends of the Bush family, and against the U.S. government for suppression of information. On 9/11, all U.S. flights were canceled, and desperate relatives of 9/11 victims were grounded. Since 15 of the 19 hijackers were accused of being Muslims from Saudi Arabia, why wasn't the fury of George W. Bush directed at Saudi Arabia instead of opium-rich Afghanistan and oil-rich Iraq? Before the first plane ever even hit the first tower on 9/11, a massive military buildup was organized near Afghanistan called Operation Swift Sword and Operation Bright Star. 23,000 British troops were sent to the Oman Gulf near Afghanistan, and 17,000 U.S. troops joined NATO troops in nearby Egypt. All of these forces were positioned for attacks on the Muslim countries of Afghanistan and Iraq before 9/11. The Patriot Act, which was designed to limit American citizens' democratic rights and freedoms, was also designed and written months before the first plane ever even hit the first tower.
You don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to wonder exactly what President George W. Bush knew about the attack, and when he knew it. According to the official White House version, it was at this moment in a Florida classroom that Bush learned the second plane had hit the World Trade Center and that the U.S. was under attack. But here's what George Bush himself said almost 3 months later when asked about September 11th.
I was sitting outside the classroom waiting to go in, and I saw an airplane hit the tower of a TV. You know, the TV was obviously on, and I used to fly myself, and I said, well, there's one terrible pilot. And I said it must have been a horrible accident. But I was whisked off there. I didn't have much time to think about it.
Now, wait a minute. George Bush was told about the second plane while he was inside the classroom. So you just heard him describe seeing the first plane crash on television that day. But that's impossible. No one saw the first plane crash on TV on September the 11th because the videotape of it didn't surface until the next day.
At 9:50,
think of it as a conspiracy theory true or false test. A, when George W. Bush started his first oil company, who helped fund it? Osama bin Laden's brother and brother-in-law. True or false? B, after a terrorist bomb at a barracks in Saudi Arabia killed 19 Americans, who got the multi-million-dollar contract to rebuild? The bin Ladens. True or false? C, on the morning of September 11th, 2001, who was in a meeting at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Washington? George Bush Sr. and Osama bin Laden's brother. True or false? Actually, the answer could be D, all of the above. Because believe it or not, as far-fetched as they sound, each and every one of those things, the bin Laden link to the Bush Oil Company, the bin Laden construction contract after the terrorist bomb, and the bin Laden-Bush meeting on 9/11, is true.